I want to start with rugby, and I've heard you mention before that a lot of champions have good game sense, and I want to hear a little bit more about that. Probably just that ball playability. A lot of the teams you've been involved with, the counter attack, the instinct plays. Can you speak more about that game sense?
Yeah, clearly some players come through, some of the champions come through with a pretty innate sense of seeing the game and understanding it. But they're like everyone else. We're real believers, or my coaching staff now, but also coaching groups I've worked with before, real believers in working on a player's strengths. And so even though a player comes in with a pretty good understanding of the game, it doesn't mean you can't work on it. And so I think that's really important to know. Like my coaching, I started my coaching probably in a pretty different way to everyone else. So when I finished playing for the All Blacks in 95, wish it was 95, 1985, Trish and I decided to take our 3-year-old twins to Italy, where I was a player coach. And whilst I've been brought up here through an analytical methodology, of where you put your hands, how you spread your fingers, thumbs up, how you pass through a plane, all those sorts of things. Over there, I was exposed to a much more global methodology. I was really lucky to have a couple of mentors who were French. Pierre Viltreux was one, who was a great French player, of course, famous in New Zealand for kicking a 67-yard penalty.
Wow.
Down in Wellington against the All Blacks. He and a guy, Andre Bonomo, who was coaching Benetton at the time in Italy, they sort of took me under their wings, and they'd been brought up in a much more global methodology with regards to teaching the game. So where we would, as I said, teach a skill, they'll teach the game with the theory that if you understand the game, you'll develop the skills to be able to play it. So as an example of that would be playing on a really narrow field where the defence is really dense, and so the attacker have to learn how to penetrate that defence. And their belief was that knowing that you'll learn the skills to be able to do it rather than having to analytically teach them. So that's essentially how I developed as a coach. I also, because I was learning Italian at the time and learning how to coach, I needed conversations with players because I needed to learn. There was a local dialect that I was trying to learn, so I started asking the players questions about what they understood about the game. So what did you do? That's a pretty easy question to answer, and I get a response. Often get a descriptive response, and so I learnt the capability of the players whilst I was improving my language. I'd ask them, what did you see that made you do that? What would you do next time? And so I developed a sort of a questioning model rather than an instructive model for coaching. Today they call it query theory, but for me it just came about as a bit of an accident. Also through work with Pierre and Andre Bonomo, I started using game-based learning as a key part of my coaching. So what I found with that was there are often a lot of mistakes in your game-based learning, but the mistakes generally are due to difficulty of the activity and maybe new information coming in. And I soon understood that the errors were a catalyst for learning rather than something to be chided about. So I started encouraging the mistakes, and if we weren't making mistakes, it was because I had made the training difficult enough, or the information coming in wasn't new enough. And so I was always trying to build that ability to play under pressure, to challenge themselves for new ways of doing things, and to understand, to develop your skills in a relevant way. So understand when you needed to use certain skills and what that meant in terms of playing the game and understanding the game. So that essentially that's how I approached coaching in those early days.
Just on that, you said you asked the question about what'd you do there. I'd imagine you can't just do that throughout a whole session and continue to stop the drill or whatever the exercise is. When was your timing of that question?
So we developed a whole methodology where we'd play the game and then break up for a short period, maybe a couple of minutes, which would then allow you to determine a skill that needed to be worked on and taken back into that game for it to improve the game. And so they were periods that you can coach, you can ask the question. Sometimes you just got to let the game go, but yeah, you need to create those little periods when you can give feedback. It's fair to say when I came back to New Zealand from Italy, I was still a really young coach, and particularly when I took over Crusaders in 1997, my methods weren't accepted wholesalely, I would say, but particularly from the public, but also the players. I started asking questions. Often I was asking the wrong question. I might ask, "Why did you do that?" And then I'd get a sort of a justification as an answer. Oh, I thought it was the right thing to do, and whereas what I wanted was something descriptive back to me about why they made a certain play. So I had to change my questions, ask what questions to get better answers. But mainly the players just wanted the answers back then. They just they will tell us the answer. Same with my game-based methodology. I don't think it was hugely accepted at the start. I think New Zealand players thought games were for kids, not for adults. So it took a while for those different ways of coaching to get any credence.
Yeah. One of my good friends, Liam Coltman, he got invited to an All Black camp. He came in. I'm sure you've worked with him. He's a great man. And when he returned, I asked him, "How'd you go? Like, what'd you learn?" And his answer was, "Well, we spent the week learning how to pass." And I think for the general public, we probably think All Blacks go to All Black camp and probably do more than that. I'm sure they did. But what he was trying to say is that they really respected the skill, and we had to be up to standard before we could do anything else. So I know you had a big part to play with changing the technique and bringing in some things around the passing mechanics. Can you tell me that sort of full story on when you identified it and how you implemented it?
I've got to say, Mick Byrne is a great passing biomechanist, and so I picked up a lot from him along the way. But initially, when I came back from Northampton in 2004 to coach the All Blacks with Graham Henry and Steve Hansen, I really wanted to flatten the All Black backline up. I felt they'd been playing too deep. It allowed the defences too much opportunity to drift off onto the next player. And so I started flattening up our tens to attack closer to the gain line. And we were working a lot on the tens understanding very quickly whether they were playing against a rush defence or whether it was... so rush defence was like the Springboks, for example, where they just blitzed you. Argentina had a fast defence, but as soon as you passed, they would drift off really well. And Australia were more of a hold and push type defence. And so we were training against those defences, and I'd get the whole idea of it was that we'd get the tens to understand which defence it was, and then they would adjust their depth dependent on the speed of the defence coming at them. And the idea was that I didn't want everyone to go deeper. I just wanted them to maintain their own depth with the tens, so that if the 10 went back 3 steps, then the rest of the back line, they all went back 3 steps as well, and they're all in their own individual space. And part of that was ensuring that they didn't leave too early. So we had a staggered departure. Sometimes I'd stand behind them and I'd hold their shorts, you know, and wouldn't let them go until the guy inside had gone and stuff like that. And then it became apparent that being able to pass more quickly and at the right time was going to be really important. So we started doing a lot of work on being able to pass either mid-stride or off the wrong foot. So most players, as they're brought up as kids, are taught to, pass off the inside foot. So if you're passing off that hand, it's the foot that you pass off. Problem with that is if I'm, say, 2 or 3 meters away from the opposition and I'm in the right position to pass, and I can't pass if I take another step because I'm not used to passing with my foot in the air or landing on the other foot, I've got to pass here. That allows the defence to slide off. So we need to go through a process of teaching that, of being comfortable off either foot, of taking the tick out of the pass. So instead of winding up, like I was taught to pass like that, I had a beautiful pass. I could catch the ball, swing away like that. I just staying straighter, to pass without a tick, to pass with either foot. They were critical skills to be able to play a flatter backline.
You must have got some frustration and resistance when you started to bring this in.
Both. Got a lot of both. So 2004, there was a media frenzy around this flat backline, Smith's flat backline. It wasn't accepted at all. And they even went to Eddie Jones, who was coaching Australia at the time. And they asked Eddie Jones about my flat backline. And Eddie said he was obviously wanting to put a bit of pressure on me as a young All Black coach. Said, we used to try that at Randwick, but mate, that's never worked and it'll never work in the future. So I'm getting all this pressure on me to change to a deep backline. But I had players like Andrew Mertens and Carlos Spencer at first five. I mean, if anyone in the world could play that style, it was them. So we persevered with it. So by 2005, we're going pretty well. And we'd had a really good tour at the end of 2004. We'd put 40-odd points against France in Paris, and we were starting to play really well. Got into the Tri-Nations, we were playing really well. We were unbeaten. We had Australia, who weren't going so well under Eddie. We had them at Eden Park. And so the media came to me and asked me a question around Eddie's robotic attacking plans. And I decided to have a crack at him and said, we've tried that, painting by numbers, but it never worked and it'll never work in the future. So I basically used the word that he used. Anyway, we won the game and we're upstairs after the game having a beer, and I could see Eddie across the room, and he sort of looked at me and raised his eyebrows and came over with his bottle of Steinlager. I thought, this will be interesting. Anyway, he came over and he clinked bottles and he said, "How you going, mate?" And I said, "Oh, you're good, Eddie. Look, I'm sorry. I said those things in the paper, but I've got a long memory." And he said, "No worries, mate. No worries at all. Like, it's just a joke to him." Whereas I'd stewed on it for a year.
Outstanding.
There's something about him though. He's a character.
And I probably want to stay just on that flat black line and putting pressure on the defence through a really good skill set. Why were you convinced that was the way forward?
Well, was I convinced?
Yeah.
Just so that you didn't allow defence's recovery time. And we'll talk later on, I suppose, about strike moves and that sort of thing. But to me, strike moves and phase play moves are all similar. You need a certain number of options off each, and you just need to make the right decision to hit the right player at the right time. So that's what we were working on. And I don't know, I was just always a fan of playing close to the opposition. In my day, of course, there was the offside line from scrums was the number 8's feet. And I really liked that ability to play right in the face and being able to pick the right option. And then if you go through there, you're through. there's no ability to recover and make the tackle. And so, it was just something that I really like, and I've always coached that way.
Mm. And I think some awesome examples in Japan rugby at the moment of just that, the flatness putting pressure on the defense. And you're right about your example. If you get through there, then there's no ability to recover. Absolutely right. Is there any truth in the statement 2011 ABs had 3 strike moves going into the World Cup from scrum and line out, and then it was just a matter of picking options?
Yeah, so comes back to what I was just saying. Effectively, I think you need 4 options of every play. 5's probably too many because it can confuse your own team. 3's probably not quite enough, too easy to mark up on. So we tended to have like a play off left field scrums, a play off midfield scrums, and a play off right side scrums, and that's all we had. Three scrum plays. But they had 4 options off each play. And so it was a matter then of learning from your plays. So someone in that group of 4 options is going to either be unmarked or poorly marked. And then it's just a matter of identifying that and giving a solution to the playmaker rather than a problem. So what I found as a 10, if players were saying to you, the space out here, or the space in behind, it just made me think, which then made me sluggish. And I just wanted to know what the call was, so I could execute the call. And so that's pretty much what we used through 2010, 2011. We just used the same plays. And it doesn't really matter because, you've got 4 options off them, and you've even got a 5th option, really, which is to dummy and go yourself. Yeah. So it's pretty hard for teams to know which one you're going to do, and the battle is you picking the right ones and then being able to mark up on it. And then we'd just replay the same move again. If it worked, we just replay it, and then replay it again. We didn't go through a menu of plays. We just kept replaying it until they marked up on that one, and that might shift their defence in to mark up and a bit closer, and then we'd go wide. So it was an effective way to play, and we scored a lot of points right through 2-10, 2-11, and smashed the French 8-7 in that final.
And from the coaching box, I suppose your role is looking for the option as well from that bird's eye view that could be on as well.
Yeah, it is, but you really want the players to be sensing it rather than looking for it. Like, I see a lot of coaches teaching decision making today and teaching guys what to look for, and to me, if you try and see everything, you see nothing, and if you're not sure what you're seeing, it makes you slow, makes you sluggish. So I'd rather the players just sense that they were in a gap, or sense that the defender would overrun them, and maybe they might get a weak shoulder, and so have a crack at that next time. That's the way I like to play, and the way I like to coach.
I love what you said about solution. Come to me with a solution, not a problem with the move. That's such a great way of putting of it. Offloads, you obviously had Sonny Bill, worked with him a lot. And from what I saw in a lot of strike moves, it almost looked like the move was to try and get an offload somewhere around him at times, and other Ma'anonu as well. Right across the park, there was offloads. Was that part of the thinking as well, or was that just one of the options?
Yeah. Well, Sonny Bill changed the game. There's no doubt about that. He was freakish with his skill. We always taught offloads, but it was only ever an option, and it was an option that was seldom used. And it always looked like flair. You talked about counter attack and passing that before. That it looks like flair. It's really flair camouflaged as hard work. And we just started to work really hard at it. And coaches have always said, you've got to sight the receiver longer when you offload. Sonny had this amazing ability to see them at the corner of his eye. So he didn't give away that he had seen the guy. He would He would use his peripheral vision. He was reasonably predictable in that he was right-handed, so he'd often come out the back of the right hand. If he was passing to his left, then he would come around his body that way, which meant then that your support players needed to work with him. They needed to know if they were coming on the left-hand side, they needed to be slightly deeper because the pass would take slightly longer and the pass would be deeper. If they were coming to his right-hand side, then they had to be a bit flatter. And so they needed in their own time. We always had periods at the end of training where they ran their own skill sessions. So if they wanted to be really exceptional at getting offloads from Sonny, they needed to work with him on that. And then other players started developing the offload as well. At one point, we put a 7 on the end of our calls. So we might have Canterbury 7, which just a reminder to the 7, whether it was Richie or whoever, that the offload was a possibility off the strike move, and him to be able to position himself to receive that. So we tended to look at keeping the ball alive as a first option, and that meant offloading even before the tackle or pass before the tackle, then offload in the tackle as a sequence of events. If you went to the ground, a pop, if it was possible. If it wasn't, then you placed and you went to the ruck. So the ruck was often the third choice. Often became the first choice, obviously, but that was a sequence that we liked to try and keep the ball alive and give the game continuity. It's always been a point of difference for the All Blacks.
And you're speaking a lot there about supporting players around the offload and coaching that in. I've heard you speak about looking for the offload, holding off rather than sort of getting into your clean out role straight away. How was that built into the guys?
Yes, it's one of the reasons I'm not a real fan of going behind players in attack. I can understand the need within your phase plays to be able to give a tip ball and then be able to go behind that player. But to me, going behind a pack of players, like passing behind 3 forwards, for example, and then playing deep behind them, to me takes out that ability to keep the ball alive, and it takes out the ability to get really quick cleans. There's a great example. I don't know if you remember, but we're playing the Wallabies at the stadium, at the covered-in stadium down in Dunedin. I forget what year it was. Anyway, they played really, really well. Hooper and Beale and guys like that were on fire. And they scored right near the end of the game to go into the lead. And it was about the 79th minute. In fact, I think the hooter went as we were kicking off. And we did a short kick to Kieran Reid, who went up, kicked the ball back to Rieko Iwani. So now we're in counter-attack mode. And because I was coaching counter-attack with the All Blacks, I was really adamant that we always go in front of players rather than behind them, because we want to score quickly off counter-backs when we keep the ball alive. Anyway, we got this ball. Rieko goes into a ruck, and Sam Whitelock and Kane Holmes go straight up and stand flat beside the ruck, which wasn't our pattern. And then so we went behind them, and we went wide, and Brodie Retallick was standing really wide by himself. Luckily it was Brodie, actually, really wide by himself, isolated. So the ball goes to Brodie. He's got about 3 tacklers hitting him. He was able to fight to stay up because he's got that capability to wait for Sam and Kane Holmes to get back and clean the ruck. They didn't get there, so someone else had to get there. But you could see their brains going as they were heading back. Oh, jeepers, we've done the wrong thing here. Somebody's going to kill us tomorrow in the review. And so they come back and they go behind the line, which is where I want them. If you don't want to be in the front line as an attacker, just step back and let the ball go in front of you. So that's what they did. We moved the ball back the other way. The ball carrier got tackled. Those 2 came in, cleaned. We got lightning quick ball, and bang, we scored under the post and we won the test match. And to me, it's a great clip because I show it to everyone, every team I coach, to say, there's a reason we want to go in front of guys in counter-attack rather than behind them, because it gives us options to clean or keep the ball alive.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the pattern game that you see at the moment is a halfback passing to, you get a pot of 3 forwards, the halfback will pass to that middle guy, and these 2 guys here are simply cleaners that'll go in and clean and try and get you quick ball. And there's a study done in Australia, actually, by Rod McQueen and Barry Honan and Andrew Slack, and a lot of the great rugby brains in Australian history have been looking at the game. And they determined that on average there are only 2 passes in plays off phases, off rucks at the moment, and one of those passes was the halfback pass. You could say today that often there's only 1 pass, and so which I'm not a fan of that. So every team that I'm with, we teach those support players that the first job is to run your line, to be a receiver of the ball, then to adjust quickly to maybe an offload, and then to adjust to the clean out. So it's not easy. It's a difficult action, clearly. You've got to be able to adapt, adjust, and overcome really, really quickly. But that's the way you train.
And probably gives you a really good picture of the type of player you're wanting to select as well, people that do have the ability to do that.
Yeah, you don't often get that luxury, of course. So you've got to be able to teach that. You can teach anything. As I said before, we work on strengths more than weaknesses, probably 80-20. And the weaknesses have to be something that are really critical to your position. So that might be one of the, for a prop, that might be one weakness might be not used to making the call that he wasn't well marked. And so getting used to that sort of feeling that, I don't think that guy was going to tackle me, or he's a little guy, I could probably break that tackle. So that might be one weakness. The other might be being able to make some of those passes and be able to hide the pass. But you can teach that stuff like you can teach just about everything else in the game.
Yeah, love it.
Another one on that, actually, Pete. In any team, even at All Black level, less likely at All Black level, but every team you've got novices and experts, and you can't always coach them the same way. So sometimes novices need a lot of instruction, and they need to be able to be able to be taught how to do stuff in an instructive way. The experts, you might just ask a question about what you do, what you see to make you do that, and then you can get the experts to coach the novices. But a novice might only be a novice in one area. So a novice at catching and passing might be an expert in clean out. And so using players as peer coaches is really important. Yep. And if they're holding a bag, the bag holder in any drill becomes the coach, able to give feedback to the person executing the skill. That's a really powerful way to coach.
Yeah, I've definitely heard you speak about that within the culture of the teams you're in, of getting that feedback, player feedback throughout the session, and queuing. Another one of your stats that I'm keen to hear about. So 55% of points come from our ball, and then 45% of points come from their ball. Yet the training habits of a lot of people are 90% working on our ball and only 10% on their ball. So I'm keen to hear more about that stat and then what you learned from that.
Yeah, so tries from counter-attack are a huge part of the game. And as I said before, it looks like it's flair, but it's not. It's a series of efficient movements like most of the game is. And actually, that's an older stat. So if you looked at Kobe, for example, in 218, 219, 220, 65% of our tries came from the other team's ball. So it came from turnovers from the other team, or kicking to us, or spillages, or quick taps. So, so once you understand that, then it becomes obvious that you're going to have to train it, and you're going to have to work out ways to force the other team to give you the ball and give it to you in a state that you're able to use it against them. So what I mean by that is if you're playing against a team where the 9 box kicks all the time, you need to force more players into that ruck so that he's got a more stable platform to kick off. Because any of those players who are in the ruck are going to be poor chasers within the line. So all of a sudden, if you've got 4 or 5 players on the ground protecting the ball for the halfback to kick, you've already got a fracture that you can counterattack into. If you haven't, it'll be because the wider chasers have seen that and they'll come in and fill that hole, but then you've got space out wide. So there's always space somewhere from that kick. Then you've got to put pressure on the kick to make sure, to try and get the 9 to overkick it so that we've got a counter-attacking opportunity. Then you've got to get your guys in close to be able to turn out and make the chasers go around you, so you're widening that fracture. So there's a whole lot of movements that go into an effective counter-attack before you've even got the ball. And then you've got to have clearly some sort of structure to play off that. Structure in the sense of movements into position so that you're full in the width of the field, rather than structure of a behind ball or an inside ball or whatever it is. Because I think once you've got that counter-attack ball, all you're doing is you're doing the obvious really quickly. That's the aim of it. And there'll always be something that appears that's obvious that'll give you an opportunity.
Fantastic example around the kick and the chase, like awesome. And I actually think it was clear with Bowden Barrett with the season he had with the Blues when they were really successful with counter-attack, is he brought that quick decision into everything that they were doing and probably what they were lacking. And I love that camouflage, the flair sort of camouflages the amazing skill. So good example. I do want to ask you about a fan favourite, Hayden Parker. So he uses one of our Kicking Tea rugby bricks. A lot of the followers absolutely love him. How's he going? And what's your experience with Cozzy?
Yeah, no, Quasi's a great man. Had a couple of world records, I think, hasn't he? With his
he has
consecutive goals kicked, 38.
Yeah, Super Rugby, he still holds it. Yeah,
Nice, I think. He's a great fella, Quasi, and he's got a great partner, wife, Renee. They've got a little boy, George, now, who's spitting image of Quasi by the look of it.
Yeah.
In fact, we sent a text a while ago, and I said, "What a beautiful little man," and George doesn't look too bad either.
Love it. Did you see the photo shoot?
The one on the grass.
Yeah, the one on the grass.
Yeah.
Very un-Quasi, isn't it?
Yeah. No, he's a beautiful man, all right, and they're a lovely family. We're really lucky to have them in Kobe. He's had a couple of difficult seasons with injuries. This last season, he had a shoulder operation. So he'd rung me during the off season. We were home in New Zealand. He'd rung Dave Dillon and I. Dave's our head coach at Kobe. I'm Director of Rugby. He rang us to see if he could play. Was it a club game or for North Otago? Can't remember. Now, I don't know if it's Curel or North Otago, but anyway, we went back to the company and we came back and said, "Yeah, that'll be good. You can play that. It's a pretty good standard of rugby. It'll keep you fit." Well, he dislocated his shoulder in the first game and had to have a shoulder reconstruction. So, unfortunately, he turned up to us and had to rehab, clearly. So it took a while for him to get into the season this year, and it was difficult at times. But anyway, he's a hell of a tough. He basically was ready by the start of the season, but he was underdone probably in terms of games at the start. He's a great man within the team.
Yeah.
Good family man. I don't think he knew what the hell he was doing with George in the start, but
that's all of us, though, right?
But he's worked it out like all us new parents do. and we've got our Cruden as well. So
yeah,
we're pretty rich in that area, and they're two guys that help the team, but always help each other as well.
Outstanding. I'm pleased to hear he's going well. I want to speak to you about your coaching now, and you've head coached the All Blacks, assistant coached many other teams with head coach and assistant roles. What do you love about the two different positions? What are some things that you really enjoyed about being a head and also assistant?
I'd never been an assistant coach until 2004. So I started off after playing. Obviously, I went to Casale Stile in Italy. I was player coach. I was head coach there. Actually, I'd asked them if they could find me a forward coach who spoke English. And when I turned up, they had a bloke, Renzo Ganzerla, who played on the wing for Italy. And not only didn't he speak English, he didn't speak Italian either. He spoke a Venetian dialect of Italian. So that was challenging at the start. Great man, though. We got on well, and we both had to work on learning how to coach forwards. So the Jeepers, I've forgotten what your question was now.
Just around the two different roles, head coach and assistant.
So I was head coach then as well as a player. Came back to New Zealand. Actually played as a South Pacific tournament, I think, for Canterbury. I was well over the hill. I think it was 88. But I played one more sort of half season. Then I dropped down and played for Canterbury B. John Phillips was our coach. I became a player assistant coach with John, but effectively was a player. Then after that, I took over as head coach of Canterbury B once John Phillips went to Canterbury. And so John Mills, who had played hooker for Canterbury and for the All Blacks with me, he became my assistant coach. Had Steve Hansen as our captain. So he was centre and captain for that Canterbury B team. And I managed to sneak sports psychologist Gilbert Anoka into the coaching group. Gilbert and I had been working together since early 80s when I was a player, and he was captain of the New Zealand volleyball team. And when my form was wavering a bit, I got into sports psychology. So he'd helped me a lot, and I just felt in 89 when I took over Canterbury B that it was something that the players deserved to have someone there who could teach some fundamentals of sports psychology. And so we'd turn up on a Tuesday and a Thursday night. Boys would have a little exercise book, pen. Gilbert would take a 20-minute session on sports psych. Boys would write notes at the front of the book, middle of the book. They'd have a glossary of terms, and at the back of the book had what ifs. So they'd come up with a series of what ifs. What if this happened before the game? How would I cope with it? That sort of stuff. So it's the start of a sports psychology initiative in rugby. So I was head coach there. I was head coach of, I coached Canterbury Sevens. We won a national title in 89, I think, or 90, maybe 90.
Can I just jump in there, Smithy? You've mentioned a lot of new things, new ideas, new concepts. How come you just didn't do what everyone else was doing, and why did you always want to be inventive with
what it wasn't a job?
Yeah,
it wasn't. I didn't see it as a career, and so I decided at the time, because it wasn't a paid career job, that I wouldn't follow the herd, that I would learn, I would see what others were doing, I would take the ideas that suited me best and I would apply them and be different to everyone else. When I was actually going back a few years earlier, when I came down to Teachers College in Christchurch in 1979, I'd been told by the Waikato coach. I played for my hometown, Pataru, small town, small club, but I could never crack the Waikato team. And the Waikato coach said to me that I would never be a first five as long as my ass pointed downwards. And I thought, yeah, it was probably right at the time. because I was young, I was still learning my way in the world, let alone rugby, and I was still learning still. You never learn the game. You're always improving in the game. But it was my first coaching lesson because it taught me, don't just judge people on the outside. You can't disregard what they've got on the inside, and that's what he had done. So anyway, when I finished university, I wanted to go to Teachers College. I decided not to go in Hamilton because I didn't think I was ever going to make the Waikato team. So I went down to Canterbury, and I remember playing a pre-season game for Belfast, my club down there, against University. And afterwards, the coach of University also played loose head prop, Laurie O'Reilly. He had a beer with me after the game, and he said, "Why don't you come around sometime and have a chat?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I'll do that." So I went around on a Sunday and knocked on the door, and his wife, Kay, opened the door, and I walked in, and there he was. There was Laurie standing in a dress. It came from Pataru. I'd never seen a dress before. It was a caftan, clearly. It was that era, I suppose. But it was the start of something really special for me because Laurie had seen, something in me, and we started talking about coaching. He used to run his own coaching courses, often weekends out at Lincoln College, and he brought out guys like Pierre Villepreux from France. He brought out Jim Greenwood, and it must have been 1980, I think, because Laurie got Gary Barkler, who was my halfback for Canterbury, Gary and I along to demonstrate some of the stuff that Jim wanted to show the coaches there. So that was sort of the start of me starting to think about coaching in a different way, because Laurie was different. He's a brilliant man, brilliant for women's rugby, hugely connected to the women's game, but brilliant at all levels. And until the day he died, he was just the most loyal friend and supporter and educator of me. And so through him, I think I learnt to have a growth mindset, that you never just took things for granted. You didn't just settle on the simple. You need to challenge yourself constantly. And so that's something I've always done. And I guess from those early days when it was amateur and coaching wasn't a career, I just retained that whole philosophy of, let's do it the way I think is best for this team and most interesting for myself and the players and the staff. And I've always forged ahead like that.
Yeah. And then, so 2004 comes around, assistant coach role. What were some of the things you thought in your head, okay, I need to approach this differently?
Well, that was interesting because I basically got the sack at the end of 2001, thanks to a Tutai Kefu try and about 18 minutes into injury time. Second time in 2 years, by the way, and I took it really seriously. I had the view that players always are always held accountable for their mistakes. So I decided to hold myself accountable for those mistakes 2 years in a row, losing games against Australia in exactly the same way, basically, our line out throw, unable to win it, game was over, other team win the ball, and John Eales kicked a goal in Wellington to win that way, and Tutai Kefu scored that great try to win in 2001. So when I questioned myself in front of the board at the interview panel, it wasn't the done thing. To question oneself, it showed a lack of passion, apparently. And so I got replaced as All Black coach and went to Northampton, where I was able to get on the horse again. So we were there 3 years, loved it. My boys were... Would
you do that again to me? So would you say the same thing in the interview?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
great.
I was accountable. And I wanted the players to know that as well. I sent messages to a lot of players. I bought some a book that I wanted them to read. And basically I wanted to know that I had myself as accountable as they were. And like I wasn't bitter about it, but there were a couple of rugby greats on that panel who thought I showed a weakness. And it wasn't really until I came back and got into the job again that they both came to me and said they realised it wasn't a weakness, it was a strength, which was an interesting development. But anyway, by 2004, we were very much integrated into a great rugby club at Northampton, and I loved it. Trish loved it there. Our two boys were working there, and we thought that probably that was going to be my future. I was a professional coach by then, and as I say, we had a great life over there. So I got a phone call from Graham Henry in 2004, beginning of 2004, saying that he was going to apply for the All Black job, and would I come back and be an assistant coach with him? He'd already spoken to Steve Hansen, and Steve was going to come back. He'd spoken to Tana Umaga and a few other players about the whole thing, and so that's what he wanted. So I was on the phone, and Trish was downstairs, and she could hear me talking to Graham Henry, so she came running up the stairs going, she didn't want to come back. Neither of my boys wanted to come back. It wasn't they didn't want to come back to New Zealand. They held a grudge, whereas I never held a grudge. But they felt I'd been hurt badly by New Zealand Rugby Union, and that we shouldn't go back. We should stay where we were happy. So I thought about it for a week. I met with Keith Barwell, who was the owner of Northampton, who was like a father figure to me, and he actually said to me, Wayne, if I was your dad, I'd tell you not to go back. And so I thought really deeply about it. Had some great players at Northampton that were mature and helpful as well. And so Graham ran back a week later, and Brendan Ratcliffe and I, my assistant coach, we were sitting over at the pub. I knew he was ringing, and I said, no, I wasn't coming back. I turned him down. But over the next week, a few people kicked into gear, and I was getting phone calls from different people. And then I realised deep down inside, I said to Trish, I think I need to go back. I need to prove to people that I've got the grit, I've got the resilience to go back and do the job. And then a lot of people were saying, well, you've never been an assistant coach, how are you going to handle that? But I haven't really got an ego, so I never saw that was going to be an issue, so long as we were allowed to debate things and we were allowed to have input. Then I was quite happy to go along with what others thought. If it was different to what I thought, as long as there was a good argument behind it. So that's how I went into the job. Luckily, Graham got the job, but luckily with Graham as a head coach, he was. It was like Steve and I were in a dual head coach role. So he gave us a lot of responsibilities. We shared the load in terms of media stuff. When we debated whether it was selections or style of game or the way we're going to train or whatever, we'd always go for the 2v1. So if it's Steve and I against Ted would always accept that and would go with that. And we had a disagree and commit philosophy. So if you would argue really strongly for something, but if the other two were against you, then you might have disagreed with it, but committed totally to it. And that's how we went forward as a group. And it was outstanding. So I never really thought of myself as an assistant coach in that era, and because of those responsibilities. And probably the same when I went with Dave Rennie with the Chiefs. I felt he was very similar in that he shared responsibilities, shared different tasks such as media, talking to supporters, all that sort of stuff. And we all had a say. So I've never found it difficult as an assistant coach because I've always had head coaches that trusted their staff. Steve Hansen the same, trusted the staff and gave you the ability to go and do your job.
Amazing insight. Disagree and commit is a really great way of looking at it. I want to ask about the All Black coaching environment, did you have a lot of fun? Like, I'd imagine, like, you see a lot of the media stuff and serious press conferences and images, but I'm sure there was a lot of laughs and training fun that you guys all had as good mates.
Yeah, well, you have to have laughs, both as a player and as not just a coach, but anyone on the staff, because there are a lot of external pressures. There are responsibilities with that, with any jersey, really. I like when I was playing for the All Blacks, I often felt the same about Belfast or Canterbury as I did about the All Blacks. It didn't make any difference to me. You know, you've got your own standards and your own love of the jersey, and to me, it was the same for each of them. And I guess it's the same when you're coaching. You love the team you're identifying with. You love the people who you're working with and coaching. And so there are pressures, but you've got to counter those. I think today having I don't know if you call it a mental health program or whatever, but you've got a responsibility to help the boys develop that grit and that ability to ride the tough times and just get on with it. We've got one at Kobe, a program at Kobe that we call Flourish, that we're trying to do that. We're trying to use things like gratitude and positive emotions, laughter, engagement in the whole program and the identity stuff that you're doing, strong relationships, not just amongst players, but amongst players in the company, players and the old boys that went before them. Those are all ways I think that you can create a really mentally strong, tough playing group and coaching group. So yeah. I think most teams probably have that responsibility today to do something like that. And I just look, I don't know how successful it is, but makes me feel better.
Yeah.
So laughter is a big part, I think, of any campaign. To every meeting with the All Blacks, every meeting with Kobe, every meeting with Chiefs, we'd have skits, we'd have jokes, we'd have silly little competitions to start the meeting off, so there's a bit of laughter. Right. We'd have club nights. We'd still allow the boys to have a beer. That's part of your culture, part of the history of rugby. And I know a lot of the S&C guys aren't too keen on that, but it's where psychology trumps physiology sometimes. And, it's a way to get the boys together and have a bit of fun. I just think it's an integral part of the game and one of the reasons we started playing in the first place.
Yeah.
So try and continue on all those traditions.
Yeah. I can imagine there's some pretty dry humour amongst the group throughout the years. Good to hear. We've got two more things that I'm really keen to get through. A book called Peak Performance. And I'm also really interested, I've heard you speak before about you taught your kids a lot about it. So I'd love to hear the influence with coaching, but also what you talk your kids about the Peak Performance book.
Yeah, so Peak Performance was, well, the one that I read anyway, was when I was down in Canterbury. I was a young player. As I said, I had a relationship with Gilbert and Oka as a player, learning a bit about the mind, so coaches always said it's top 2 inches that count, but no one ever told me how to use them. Yeah. So I was determined to find out what that looked like. So there's a book called Peak Performance, which was around imagery, essentially. And it was mainly to do with tennis, nothing to do with rugby, but I was able to take that and apply it to my sport. So I started, you can't train every minute of the day physically, so you have to find a way to be able to replicate that mentally. So I used to use imagery, and I would make little notes for the week about Tuesday night. I was going to spend 15 minutes. I had a room set aside at our home the boys knew not to come running into, where I had a comfortable chair, and I would do my imagery program, and I'd plan what I was going to image, whether it was just catch pass, whether it was running from the open side of a scrum to the blind side, switching my eyes to the winger. I could see if he came in, I'd make the pass. If he stayed out, I'd dummy and go. So I was able to practice seeing the game that I wanted to play. It takes a bit of work, just like any training, because if you're going to image it, you want to image it perfectly. There's some evidence. I don't think it's totally scientifically proven, but if you can see something really, really clearly, some action clearly, then those muscles fire within the pattern that you would use to make that movement. I like a wee bit of. I close my eyes. I can see the situation. I like to feel the ball in my hands. And I like a wee bit of movement. Others just like to just sit there and image. But anyway, that was something that I learned to do. I used to do vividness and controllability exercises. I could see a can of Coke, for example, and I make it as big as a house, as small as a mouth. So I'd build in. So I'd warm up for my my imagery sessions just like I would for a normal session. So I teach that. I still teach that today to players. I think it's an effective way to, particularly for players coming out of injury who can't train physically, but it's also a really good way to, you don't want light-out players jumping every day of the week, so for them to be able to image that is really important. So that's one thing. That, the other book that's had a huge impact on me in terms of teaching mental health or teaching mental toughness or grit or whatever you want to call it, work by Martin Seligman from Penn State University. So one of the books he wrote was called Learned Optimism. So he'd done a whole lot of different studies using dogs initially to find that there's a state called helplessness. And just really quickly, he had static electricity come through the cages these dogs were in. Some dogs in cage A could stop the electricity by poking this button with their snout. The dogs in the other cage couldn't stop the electricity. And so in the end, they just lie down helplessly. Then he took the dogs out of those cages, put them into an open cage. And so he put the dogs who could stop the electricity into the cage and into this open cage with a wall between two compartments. So put a dog in there, electricity would start. The dog couldn't find the button to stop the electricity, so just jump over the wall and get away from the electricity. But when he put the other dogs in to the same little compartment, as soon as the electricity came, they just lay down. They didn't even think to jump over because they were helpless. And so he proved that was a state. And then he proved that optimism was a key component of battling depression or helplessness.
Wow.
So he worked out a way to determine, where students came into Penn State University, to determine whether they were optimists or whether they were pessimists. So he'd categorise them through a test that he set up. And then what he would do is take a group of optimists, take a group of pessimists, and he'd take a group of learned optimists, that pessimists that he taught how to be optimists, and he followed them through life. Like, this is a 40-year study.
Wow. And
overwhelmingly, the optimists and the learned optimists had less problems with depression and had more success in their jobs than the pessimists. So if you know that, why wouldn't you teach it to your family?
Yeah.
I've got two sons. One's an associate professor. The other's finishing a master's in history at the moment. And they go through a lot of stress with exams and assignments and that sort of thing. But being able to dispute that they can't do something has been really important for them. So getting a bad exam result or a bad test result, being able to say, well, I've actually done it before. I know the subject. I just got the question wrong, or I understood the question differently to the guy who was marking it. And that's learning to be optimistic, knowing that you can do it. Every dog has its day, and your day is going to be next week. That's pretty much the attitude. So that made a huge difference to me and in the work that I do with players. It's something I always try and teach. So Seligman, I think, has been really influential in that area for me.
Shit, you explained that really well. I loved, Awesome. And so important, I think, to be optimistic and if it can be learned. What was the name of that book again?
Learned Optimism.
Cool. Awesome. I'll
He,
put that.
he also wrote it. Seligman also wrote another book called Authentic Happiness, which I really enjoyed. It was essentially around the need for positive emotions. Your team's a community like any community, and in any community, if the occupants of house A are depressed and unhappy, then the next door neighbours are probably going to catch a bit of that. Yeah. It's infectious. And then their next door neighbours will catch a bit of it. And so it can go through a community. The blockbuster finding for me from Seligman's books has been that happiness and optimism are more contagious than unhappiness and depression. So creating a team based on that, I think, is really important. But the funny thing was, I then read his latest book called Flourish, and in Flourish, he sets about dispelling his theory and authentic happiness, or basically saying that his findings in authentic happiness, that you needed positive emotions to be truly happy, were not wrong, but not sufficient enough. Yeah. And so Flourish is a really good book for coaches today, I think, to give them some sort of blueprint for how they could help their team, how they could build a bit more mental toughness within the team. It's not the be all and end all, but it's a good start.
I think even just knowing that it's contagious is really important as well, your behaviour. Thanks for that. That's awesome. I just would love, you've got a Kobe top on. I know that speaking with a couple of the players, that 2018 was a big change in winning the championship. I'd probably just love to hear, just to wrap up the podcast, that story of the year and how you tied in the company and the culture and the team. That story.
Yeah, so I finished with the All Blacks at the end of 2017. I didn't go on the interview tour. I had prostate cancer, and I decided midway through the year that I wanted to get it out, have a prostatectomy. So that's what I did. And my time had come anyway with the All Blacks. I'd had, at that stage, I'd had a third of my year either playing or coaching the All Blacks. It's a hell of a long time. So it's as important for the players and staff for me to go as it was for me. Anyway, I'd been approached.
You did pretty well for the All Blacks.
I was approached by Gori Fukumoto, who had just become Kantuku, or Director of Rugby for Kobelco Steelers. And I'd had an association with them anyway through the Chiefs, through my years with the Chiefs. Because they're partners, Chiefs and Kobe are basically partners. So he asked if I'd come over and run the program for them. They were replacing coaches. In fact, they'd replace coaches just about every year. They'd had some really top coaches there. Guys like Gary Gold, Alistair Coetzee, Jim Mackay, who I took over from, really top coaches. But they hadn't had a lot of success for a while, and I started doing a bit of research, ringing guys from other clubs, coaches from other clubs. What they think about Kobe? They virtually all said the same: that a lot of talent, a lot of Porsches in the car park, but soft underbelly. Good for 20 minutes, and then you could get on top of them. And so I started at the end of 2017 by selecting a coaching group. So Dave Dillon became a head coach. Nick Holton, who was already there at Kobe, but not in a full-time capacity as a coach, he became a coach for me. I got Steve Cumberland, who'd been there previously. I was at Kintetsu, but I wanted him back. I'd known him well when he was with Highlanders. We were good mates, and I knew what he was all about. So got him there. Scotty Hansen was already there, who's now coaching Crusaders. He was also coaching the Sunwolves and Japan, so that was difficult. And we got Andre Bell to come in as a part-timer who then took over from Scott Hansen. We had a Japanese intern called Kihei Morita, who played 10 a couple of times for Japan. And we had a player, Andres Becker, coming out of the playing group who we wanted as another intern, basically. Big group of players, 52 players, which was new for me, huge amount of players. But I ran the camps, the initial coaching and staff camps I ran out in Cambridge because of my prostatectomy. I couldn't travel at that point. So they came out to me. We booked out an office in Cambridge for a week and we did some research. And so I wanted to know about the club. I knew very little about the club, and we wanted to settle on something that we could use to create some real personal meaning for these boys and identity, and know who they were and who they were representing. And then it became apparent that it was the most successful club in Japanese history. It was 94 or 92 years old at the time. Wow. It was a game adopted by the company as a character builder for tough steel workers. And so as we went through the history, you started to build a picture of this is a tough club. And I've been told that they've got a soft underbelly, but this is a tough club. So we started talking to old boys who'd won multiple competitions. Hagamoto, a very successful coach from the past. Hirao, who unfortunately passed away, but the star of the club. These guys painted a totally different picture than what the current picture I was getting. Mm. And then one day, Gori-san said, "Oh, by the way, Kobe was destroyed in the earthquake." And I knew Kobe was destroyed, and he said, "In Kobe Steel, the factory was destroyed." I said, "Really?" That was 1995, so it's not that long ago. Mm. So he had all these old photos, so we had a look at the photos. And then he showed me this photo of the number 3 blast furnace, which provided the world automotive industry with 60% of their springs.
Wow.
And the factory had collapsed. And he said, this photo of the number 3 blast furnace is often the photo that you see associated with the Hanshin earthquake, because we were the first company to recover and to start operating again. And I'm going, are you kidding me? And so we went through this whole story of I won't go into much depth, but how quickly the blast furnace was repaired, how quickly got the flame relit, how they got the molten ore out of there to be able to fix it, and the tough decisions that the staff, led by the CEO, had to make under the hugest pressure, because if it wasn't fixed within 3 months, they were going to lose their IP. They were going to have to get someone else to provide the steel that they'd been providing. And so within 67 days, they were up and operating again.
Wow. So
just by telling you those things, as well as the age of the club and the fact that it's for steel workers, it wasn't hard to sell to the boys a work ethic and understand that they were playing for a special club. They weren't just at any club. They were at a great club, and they were representing a company that shown the toughness and resilience to not bow to the earthquake. And so that's us. We've developed a lot of initiatives, the way we run the team, based on that. So 218, together with that, I wanted to bring all the ideas of rugby that I've ever learned in my life, all the best ideas I wanted to bring to Kobe. And one of the things that had shaped me hugely as a young kid was the 1966 All Japan team that came out to New Zealand. 67 through to 69 was one of the greatest eras of New Zealand rugby. All Blacks were unbeaten, phenomenal era, phenomenal depth of players. So this All Japan team comes out, and So I was 10 at the time. My old man took me to watch them play Bay of Plenty. And I'd never seen anything like it for a kid from a little rural town. They never jumped in the lineouts. So they'd drop down onto one knee and the hooker would throw it down to their knees and they'll pass the ball back and they'll just play.
Smart.
They had a little winger called Demi Sakata who scored 5 tries against Bay of Plenty. And they beat Bay of Plenty. And I'd never seen rugby like it. They didn't kick the ball away. If they did kick, every kick was positive. Everything they did was trying to speed the game up and score. They then played the Junior All Blacks was their test match on that tour. And so you can imagine how strong the All Blacks were. So the Junior All Blacks were a hell of a strong. And they beat the Junior All Blacks, All Japan. And Demi Sakata scored 4 tries. He then stayed on and played for Canterbury. He scored something like 31 tries in 27 games for Canterbury. And so it had an amazing influence on me as a little kid, seeing this sort of rugby. So when I went to Kobe, my first a media session I had, I explained this to the media people that my dream was to come over to Kobe and be true to that All Japan team and play a similar style of rugby. So I banned box kicks. We created a kicking strategy that was much more attacking and made more sense to me based on backfield movements. We all bought into, the staff and the players all bought into a really exciting game, a game that allowed us to move the ball from anywhere if it was on. And so, we stumbled a bit at the start, but by the time we got through to the playoffs, we were unbeaten. We won a quarterfinal. I think we got 60 points on Rico, I think, in a quarterfinal.
Yeah.
Struggled against Toyota in the semi-final, won maybe 38-19 or something like that. And then went up to play Suntory, who were going for a three-peat. And for some reason, we played at their home ground in Tokyo. I'm not sure why, because we were hit top qualifiers. But anyway, we had some great players in that team who were great leaders and will become great coaches. Andy Ellis was one. He was one of the captains. Adam Ashley Cooper. He's probably the best player of my time at international level. He's probably the best player I've coached against because he popped up everywhere and he was so outstanding at every position he played at. So coaching him was a real thrill to me. I used to take my computer down after trainings and show him something and he'd say, "Oh, bugger, I've told the boys the wrong thing." And he'd gather the boys all around, he'd show them the clips. And so he was becoming a coach like we were. Daniel Carter there as well, obviously, who I've got a long association with, and he was fantastic in that team. So we went up there and we beat Suntory 55-5 in the final. I think we kicked 7 times in the match. And then the following year was a bit the same. We played Suntory in the semi-final the year after. They played really well. We beat them not by much. We beat them and then we beat Kubota 43-7, I think, in the final. So it was a really quick turnaround, but it was everyone getting excited. Everyone starting to understand who we were, and that whole idea of you're stewards of the jersey for a short time. And when you hand that on, it's got to be in a better position than when you got it, because that's what the club, that's what the history demands. And so you have players striving to make their jersey better, and a few have passed on and to go and work at the company and retire. And they've definitely left the jersey in a stronger place. So
and the culture and the story was touched on through the week, daily sessions.
Yeah. So that stuff can't just be a poster on the wall. You got to feed it, and you got to feed it daily. And the way you feed it is through your language. Like every team's got an opportunity to be unique. You don't have to use the language of other teams. You have to use the language of rugby. Like, so we don't have attack or defence or counter-attack. We've got our own language around that. And the same in the All Blacks, we've got our own language, and the Chiefs. And so everything should tie into your identity, who you are, and what you want to achieve. Awards, if you're handing out awards, they should feed that legacy stuff. the game plan should reflect the attitude you've got as a group and the attitude of the past. How do they play? How are you going to honour them? So I think everything, it's a big job, but you've just got to feed and grow it constantly.
Yeah.
And if you've got a group of players that are hand up rather than hand out, you can achieve anything. And we had a group like that. We had a group of players who didn't want to lose anymore. Some players come in like Daniel Carter, who virtually never lost, and he didn't want to lose. And then you had these other players that were sick of losing. So it wasn't as difficult as what it sounds to turn it around. The difficult thing now is to keep it going. So you've always got to, whilst you keep the core the same, the bone deep stuff remains the same. You've got to experiment around the fringes to get that excitement going and make sure that the hands are up, rather than letting the disease of me come in where players want a bit more and want it a bit easier. So that's challenge. That's challenge of all teams, I think, that have been successful.
Yeah, outstanding. And what you touched on there about feeding the culture daily, like even that language in itself is so explanatory. So we'll leave it there, mate. I seriously appreciate your time and your explanations and your sharing. So I know that the listeners will get a lot out of it. So thanks so much. And
I just wanted to say, as you mentioned the word sharing, I learned a real lesson in 1997 off Graham Henry. So he had been coaching, he'd won the championship Super Rugby with Blues clearly in 96. In those years, the winning coach was asked to go and do a presentation at the Super Rugby conference in Wellington.
Yep.
So Ted gets up as early 97 and shared everything that the Blues did in 1996. All the detail, down to the level of the number 8 passing, got to be flat off the back of this. I still remember the stuff. Got to be flat off the back of the scrum. Want the halfback to be 8 meters wide. We want runners on it, and all sort of stuff. And it made a real impression on me, because what he was doing was Blues were at that point there in 96. And so what he was doing, he was sharing all this information to get everyone else up to that point. But he was already moving to there. So as soon as he walked out that door, after he'd shared everything, he knew that he had to come up with some new ideas and he had to innovate. And it made a real impression on me. It's something that I've carried through, and I try and tell everyone about it. It was an outstanding learning experience for me.
Yeah, outstanding. And I suppose anyone who does want to learn a bit more about your story, there's a great doco. I think it's on the All Blacks YouTube page. Just Google All Blacks Wayne Smith, which puts a lot of pictures to some of the stuff you've explained as well, which is really exciting. So no, thanks so much for your time. We'll leave it there and have a good one.
Pleasure, mate. Cheers.